and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom, and this is the Werewolf Tag. I just want to say a big thank you to Nready, who has tagged me, obviously thinking about me. I appreciate it, pal. And yeah, it's a bunch of questions obviously that you probably have seen on other channels by now to do with werewolf movies. I'm actually going to add an additional question to this werewolf tag, and I'm going to tag a couple of people at the end purely because I felt there's a question I'd like to ask that I would have been thoroughly interested in other people's responses, and I feel it's a shame it wasn't in this tag, so I'm going to add it, but we'll come on to that last. So let's go through the other questions first, however. Favourite werewolf movie? Now, a lot of people have said the same thing. American Werewolf London or The Howling tend to be the kind of common answers, and I appreciate those two films are very good. But for me personally, the movie that I like the best, my favourite werewolf film, is Dog Soldiers. So it's directed by Neil Marshall, a British horror movie about these kind of the squad of British soldiers that go on and exercise in Scotland, and they found out there's a kind of a pack of werewolves descending on this kind of small farmhouse that are kind of hunting them. There's fantastic dialogue, the characters are great, the direction is fantastic. Obviously Neil Marshall, you may know him from The Descent among other things, directed a bunch of episodes of Game of Thrones. And you know, the werewolves look great. They're apparently, a lot of them were played by ballerinas because they were kind of tall and slender and stuff like that. I really enjoyed this movie. It's got loads of kind of good action in it, but it's also some pretty fantastic gore, and there's a fantastic scene involving Sean Pertwee. There are a couple of questions here that I found very broad, and this is the first of them. Are werewolves better than vampires? Better how? Exactly? I mean, what's the parameters here? And what kind of werewolves and vampires are we talking? So this question I find a little hard to answer, to be honest, because there's not enough information. So the way I'm going to approach this question is what I would prefer if I had to be one of them, and if we're kind of basing it on the most popular legends of both vampires and werewolves. So the advantage of being a werewolf is you can pretty much lead a normal life, with the exception of, you know, 1, 2, 3 nights a week, depending on what you look, you know, which film you're looking at, and then obviously you're a beast. You're kind of, you know, doing whatever. But for the most part, you can live a normal life, and you are alive. You're alive. You're a human with a soul and everything like that, so you can live somewhat of a normal life. The downside for me is it looks extremely painful to be turning into a werewolf, and you have no control about what you're doing, and I'll come on to that again. A vampire, the advantage is you have control, unlike a werewolf. So in most vampire films, the vampires are self-aware, they have their own consciousness, they can make their own decisions, and can, again, still have social lives, if that makes sense. The downsides are you're dead. That's the big one, isn't it? You are physically dead. And you do have more weaknesses, and some pretty big ones if we're talking about sunlight and stuff like that. However, the big thing for me is about the control, because if you are a vampire, you can choose to how you feed. You don't necessarily have to kill people. You can, as we see in films, you know, eat animal blood, you can go to the blood bank, you can bite people but not necessarily kill them, things like that. So you have more of a control about what you're doing. With the werewolf, despite the fact that you are, for the most part, you know, can lead a normal life, those times when you are a werewolf, you are complete out of control. So you may kill any random person, including friends and family members, which means you are ostracised if you want to play it safe. So you either have the risk of killing friends and family members, or you have to remove yourself from their lives completely. So although I think the restrictions may be greater for you personally as a vampire, I would not want to have that loss of control. So for me personally, I would say being a vampire is better for that reason, the fact that I can choose what I am doing, and you can still have social interactions with humans and other vampires, but just choose what you're doing ultimately. So there you go. I feel like maybe I've thought about that question a bit too much. Anyway, most brutal scene in a werewolf movie. Again, I've approached this in a certain way. I've seen a lot of the same films being mentioned in this one. So although the film I'm going to pick is maybe not the most brutal scene that I've seen, but it's the film that affected me at the time the most. And the reason I say that is because I watched this film when it was first released back in the late 80s, and at that point I wasn't used to watching loads of horror films. And I remember seeing it and thinking, Jesus Christ, that's kind of really harsh. And I see more films more recently, and I'm so used to watching horror films now, they kind of don't really have any effect. And this film isn't a werewolf film. It has a werewolf in it, but it's not a werewolf film. And that film is called Waxwork. So we have a group of people going to this haunted waxwork, basically, and then we have a character played by the actor Dana Ashbrook goes into this werewolf exhibit, and there's John Rhys Davies at a table transforming into a werewolf. And there's this kind of farmer guy or something also in this kind of thing, and the werewolf literally grabs this guy's head, starts crushing it, and then literally pulls his head apart, splitting the guy in two. And then there's another scene later on where the werewolf like twists someone's head off, and to me that was brutal. That was harsh times when I saw it back in the day, because I didn't realise quite how gory that movie was going to be. By today's standards, it might not be so much, but you know, when I was at the time, you know, it was fairly harsh. That was like, I always remember that. I remember that scene, and although I've seen other more brutal films now, they don't stick in my mind. So that's my answer. The best transformation scene. Now, everyone pretty much has picked American Werewolf in London, and rightly so. If I have to answer this question in a technical term, then that is the best werewolf transformation scene. It's what everyone remembers about this movie. Ultimately, it's why it won the Oscars for the effects. But for me personally, for what I like, and I think I've watched scenes from this many times because I enjoy it. So I'm going to pick something else. Now, it's actually a TV show. Although the pilot episode is feature-length and was released as a film here in the UK, so it still counts. And there's a TV show simply called Werewolf that only ran for one season, stars John J. York as a guy who is bitten by a werewolf, and ultimately he kind of goes on an Incredible Hulk journey to try and find a cure, etc., helping different people along the way. Along the way he encounters various different werewolves and things like that. But there's two reasons why I like this. Firstly, there's a variety of werewolves in this series, but even if we just take the pilot episode, every werewolf transforms in a slightly different way, and I like that. I just like the fact that it has that individuality about it, because obviously we're all individuals as people, we all look different. I like the fact that the werewolf transformation is different depending on who you are. Like our antagonist werewolf, the way he transforms, he kind of pulls his mouth apart and the snout kind of comes out. And that's cool, but the one I like the best is the very first time we see a werewolf transformation, and it's when our main character is kind of at his friend's apartment, because his friend is a werewolf and wants him to stop him, and he's kind of just tied to this chair and he kind of starts to transform, and obviously our main character can't believe it and all of that. But there's some fantastic effects on there for a TV budget, and the one that always sticks to me, and it's an effect, I just don't know how they've done it. The guy's eye changes, kind of like, it looks like an owl, it changes almost into like an owl looking eye. The effect is incredible because I just don't know how they've done it. I mean, it doesn't look like it's prosthetics, it's before CGI. It's a really great effect, and I like the fact the guy's hand is literally covered in tiny all these little hairs and stuff like that. It's not technically the best werewolf film, but it's one that I enjoy the most. So yeah, it's the Werewolf TV show, specifically the pilot episode, which was released as a film in the UK. Worst werewolf movie? Doing a channel that reviews lots of B movies, I've seen plenty of bad movies and plenty of bad werewolf films. And I actually had to look at a few of my reviews to remind myself of these, because obviously I forget them once I've seen them. And there's a load of crap ones, more crap ones than good ones, but there was two that really that I remember watching, having watched the reviews, and that I really gave poor ratings to. The first one was called Dark Moon Rising, I think it was, and it's kind of like clearly trying to cash in on the kind of the Twilight series, and this love story. It's such cheap trite. It's got Eric Roberts in it for about 5 seconds, and it's a real bullshit story. And it's just like crappy characters, shitty effects. You know, have this kind of forced romance, etc. Really crap werewolf film, Dark Moon Rising. But the one I think I rated the lowest was a British one called Love Bites, or Love Bite. Now it's a horror comedy, and I absolutely slate it in my review. And having rewatched it, it's kind of the review reminding myself of what I didn't like. The plot is nonsensical. There's so many plot holes in it, and people defend it saying, "Oh, it's a comedy, so therefore you shouldn't care." I should care. The characters are all massively unlikable. There's no chemistry between the leads. It absolutely rips off a TV show here called the In-Betweeners. They're trying to make like a horror version of the In-Betweeners, and if you're from the UK, you know what I'm talking about. And then the actual werewolf reveal itself is this huge, massive, like CGI werewolf that we're meant to believe is sneaking around. It's just ultimately shit. And I've got loads of dislikes on that video because I think I got a feeling I got a comment on IMDb about it, and well, they had comments, and it was like from one of the actors. So it's massively downvoted, that one. Anyway, that is my pick for the worst one. Okay, what's next? First werewolf movie I've ever watched, and this is the same answer as a lot of people here, and that's going to be the Wolfman, the Universal's Wolfman. I used to watch those black and white horror films with my grandparents when they were still with me, and yeah, that's the first exposure really to anything horror. Here's another ambiguous question. Best legend of the werewolf. What does that mean? I've seen some people answer it, which kind of, but is the mythology that they like, which actor has been in a werewolf movie that they find iconic. So it's a really broad question. Please make more specific questions in these tags. Anyway, so I'm going to take it as what part of the werewolf mythology do I like, and that would have to be the full moon. Obviously, the kind of the calling card of the werewolf, that kind of precursor that you know shit is going to go down, and the visual imagery that you can use with the full moon and stuff like that. I think it's great. I also like the fact that obviously there is in real life evidence to say that the lunar cycle can have an effect on kind of like on kind of the mentality of people. Certainly, people who have you know, certain mental deficiencies and things like that, and lunatics. Anyway, so that to me is my favourite kind of mythology based on the werewolf. Now I've actually, like I've mentioned, I'm actually going to add an additional question, and I add this because I'm very curious to see what people think, and I'm a bit disappointed this something like this wasn't in the actual questions before this, so I'm going to ask it, and if people want to add this question onto their videos from now on, fine. But my question is what is your favourite physical werewolf in a movie? Which is the coolest looking werewolf in a film or TV show, maybe even, you know, that you just like the look of? For me, it's the movie Bad Moon, because I think the werewolf in that looks badass. I mean, obviously it's just really before CGI kind of started taking off. The transformation scenes are crap because they use that morphing technology that looks really, has aged really badly. But the actual physical puppet thing that they've used looks great. And what I really liked about it, I like werewolves that have a long snout. I don't like the kind of the flat-faced werewolves that you kind of get a la the Wolfman. I like ones that are kind of have a snout, but I also like bipeds. So things like Miracle Werewolf in London, where it's on all fours. I prefer, you know, a biped. I like walking like a man, but maybe with the head of the wolf. And this werewolf looks great. It's got this really wide jaws that open that are like properly good, well animated and stuff. So the actual werewolf from Bad Moon, I think is great. It's my favourite looking werewolf on screen. And I have to go say, I'll give a shout out to Michael Jackson's Thriller, actually, because I do quite like that, even though it's, you know. Anyway, there is a kind of like an add-on thing saying do a werewolf howl, but I'm actually recording this at 11 o'clock at night, and I live in an apartment, so my neighbours will not appreciate this. You'll get a mini one. That's as best as you're going to get. Anyway, so thank you again to NReady. I feel like this video's gone on forever. For tagging me. I am going to tag the Wicker Boy, because I've checked and you haven't done one of these as of yet, so and I know you're a huge horror fan, so very curious to what you have to say. And also a YouTuber who I've recently only started to converse with, and he's a not so much a horror fan. I know he does have some horror movies, but I know he's an old school type of guy in regards to his movie likes, and that is Eastwood4life fan. And I'll be very curious to hear what you have to think about these questions and what you say, because I know you go quite into detail, a bit like me really, so I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are. But it's kind of an open tag as well. If anyone wants to do this who watches this video who I haven't tagged, please do. Anyway, thank you again to NReady for tagging me, and obviously I've enjoyed watching other people's videos of these. Even though I don't comment a lot, I do watch them. Anyway, thanks for watching, and bye for now.